West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
Well, Donald Trump endured the worst day of his life as a criminal defendant today. It was Donald Trump's first time in a courtroom as a criminal defendant for anything other than his arraignments. Donald Trump was not allowed to speak, and we can only imagine the intensity of his agony when he looked up at the judge's bench to see that his future as a criminal defendant was going to be decided by three women: a black woman, an Asian woman, and a white woman 2 years older than Donald Trump. Donald Trump has expressed himself clearly as a racist and misogynist over the course of his public life, and so we can be close to certain at how he must have been seething at a three-judge panel of those women, a three-judge panel that did not include a single right-wing white man appointed by Donald Trump. Donald Trump's best hope on that bench today was 79-year-old Karen Henderson, who was appointed a federal district court judge by President Ronald Reagan and then elevated to the Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. by President George H.W. Bush 34 years ago. Judge Henderson had this reaction to Donald Trump's lawyer's claim that Donald Trump cannot now be prosecuted for any crimes that he committed while President of the United States.
I think it's paradoxical to say that his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed allows him to violate criminal laws.
And that was not the worst of what Donald Trump had to hear from the three-judge panel today. Judge Michelle Childs was first appointed as a federal district judge in South Carolina by President Obama. President Biden elevated her to the Washington, D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Congressman James Clyburn of South Carolina urged President Biden to appoint Judge Michelle Childs to the United States Supreme Court, but she came in second in the Biden selection process for the now Supreme Court seat occupied by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Donald Trump's lawyer, John Sauer, was the first to speak in the proceeding, as is customary in an appeal, and Judge Childs interrupted him almost immediately to point out that there is nothing in the Constitution that supports the Trump argument that a president can only be prosecuted after being impeached by the House of Representatives and convicted in a trial in the Senate.
You're not giving me anything that says explicitly in the references that you cite.
One is the plain language of the impeachment judgment clause, which says that only the party convicted shall be subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law.
But so that's to take the negative inference, correct?
The plain language supports that we heard from the very beginning that it is the plain language that is the natural and ordinary meaning of the impeachment judgment clause.
No one else in the courtroom agreed with that today. Judge Florence Pan made it clear that she believes it all comes down to the brand new interpretation of the impeachment clause of the Constitution offered by Donald Trump's lawyer.
Since President Trump concedes that a president can be criminally prosecuted under some circumstances, he says that that is true only if he is first impeached and convicted by Congress. Do you agree that this appeal largely boils down to whether he's correct in his interpretation of the impeachment judgment clause? That is, if he's correct that the impeachment judgment clause includes this impeachment first rule, then he wins. And if he's wrong, if we think the impeachment judgment clause does not contain an impeachment first rule, then he loses.
Judge Pan was looking down at a man in her courtroom today for 1 hour and 15 minutes who has said her blood is poison. Donald Trump recently said that immigrants poisoned the blood of this country. Florence Pan's parents came to the United States from Taiwan. They lived in the same city as Donald Trump when Florence Pan was born in New York City. She graduated summa cum laude from the same college Donald Trump graduated from, the University of Pennsylvania. She was immediately hired by Goldman Sachs, the leading investment bank in the world, but after a couple of years, she decided that spending your life chasing money like Donald Trump was no way to live. And so she went to Stanford Law School, then served as a law clerk for a federal judge in the Southern District of New York who was appointed by Republican President Ronald Reagan. She then worked in the Justice Department, the Department of the Treasury. President Biden chose Florence Pan to occupy the seat in the Washington, D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals that was vacated by Ketanji Brown Jackson when she moved up to the Supreme Court. Donald Trump believes that Florence Pan's children are carrying the poisoned blood of immigrants. He believes that Florence Pan and her children have infected the United States, an infection that needs to be stopped by him. Because of the sterling professionalism exhibited by all of the judges on the panel today, there is no reason to believe that Donald Trump's phrase, poisoned blood, was on Judge Pan's mind for a second when she pierced the Trump argument in a way that will make it impossible for any judge, including the Trump-appointed judges on the Supreme Court, to rule that the President of the United States has complete immunity from any crimes committed while president, unless that president is convicted in a Senate impeachment trial for those crimes.
Could a president order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? That's an official act in order to SEAL Team 6?
He would have to be and would speedily be, impeached and convicted before the criminal prosecution.
What if he weren't? There would be no criminal prosecution, no criminal liability for that?
Chief Justice's opinion in Marbury against Madison and our constitutional tradition and the plain language of the impeachment judgment clause all clearly presuppose that what the founders were concerned about was not...
I asked you a yes or no question. Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution?
If he were impeached and convicted first. And
so your answer is no.
My answer is qualified yes.
You just heard Donald Trump's lawyer actually say that if Donald Trump becomes president again, he can order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, and he cannot be prosecuted for that murder if a Republican Senate decides not to convict him of that high crime in an impeachment trial. Donald Trump is the single stupidest person ever to sit at a counsel table in that courtroom, but even Donald Trump understood that in that moment, his immunity dream was shattered by a judge Donald Trump does not believe should be a citizen of this country.
It is Wednesday, the 10th of January of 2024, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special, daily special, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? And yes, it is plural. There's a lot of them. And some self-appointed ones as well. In fact, there's more of those than the actual ones who have gone through training. Jeez. Everybody thinks that if you're going to get next to God, all you have to do is exist. No, it takes training. My God. That's why it's my God. Not your God. No one ever says your God when they exclaim the absurdity of the world. It's always my God. My God. I feel centered now. Yeah, I must be human. Whatever that is. So, we're off on another tangent, just like Ackman. When is this guy going to stop reminding us that his wife actually plagiarized in a much more serious and impactful way than Professor Gay did? Mm-hmm. Yep, and now he's mad. How dare you bring my wife into this? Well, I don't know. You brought another guy's wife into it. What are you going to do? You can do it to us. Can't do it to them. What do we call those people? Yeah, bullies. Old Elon Musk, speaking of bullies, old Elon Musk was on the Twitterers complaining that there's black pilots, women pilots. Oh my God. You would expect an heir to an apartheid blood emerald fortune to think like that and live like it too. Yeah. I mean, let's remind ourselves there's a whole lawsuit going on because, on the factory floor, all the black guys got to go over there. Don't let them over here with us. Yeah. And that's not the end of it either. So we already had an idea about his tendencies. Now he's just letting the whole world know about it. He thinks diversity, equity, and inclusion is the reason that door plug popped out. When it's hedge fund manager financiers who took over Boeing and farmed out the building of a fuselage to a subcontractor instead of building it in-house in Seattle like they used to. When the engineers ran the company. Now, I got to tell you, I'm no big fan of engineers running things. All you got to do is watch a few Twilight Zone's Outer Limits. I don't know. Any Ray Bradbury story. The engineers might not be the best people to be making decisions about, I don't know, life and death. Well, it is life and death. But I'm just saying, sometimes engineers can have a cold, calculating eye about things. Okay? We only have so much oxygen left. You gotta go. Could be something like that. I mean, do you want an engineer making those decisions on the lifeboat? Maybe you do. But when the financier hedge fund people like Ackman, and let's be clear, Elon Musk is not an engineer. He's not trained as one. He aspires to be one. He got a bunch of money writing code, I guess, to make a little bank that he wanted to call X, and Peter Thiel said, "You're not going to call it X, brat." And that's Peter Thiel, who's the biggest brat in the world, calling Musk a brat. Jeez. Revenge of the brats. We're not revenge of the nerds. We got revenge of the brats. Anyway. So Musk is out there saying, this equity, inclusion, diversity thing. He's blaming it on the pilot. Now, I don't know if the pilot is, I know she's a woman. I don't know if she's also black. Regardless, he's got a problem. He's very misogynist, as we know, and he's a racist. Let's be clear. The way he's talking about woke and all this stuff, let's be clear about that. That is racist terminology, and it's purposeful. It's giving people succor that they can go ahead and use the N-word, but instead of it, you can use woke. People like that, too. It's like, the N-word's 2 syllables, woke is 1. Okay? Biggest like single syllables. Oh, my God. And now we get to let them run the show. Do we? Do we get to? So, old Ellen, he's all part of the chaos agent, war against reason, war against representative democracy. Sounds like it. It is a war. And that's why I call the people who are arrayed against representative democracy, who are in the moneyed class. That's why I call them, American Nazi billionaires. Okay? Because it ain't some sort of, equality, equity, diversity, and inclusion the American Nazi billionaires are, striving for, which is really, all of us. They're not there for us. I think that they know that there's some sort of metal type of asteroid headed our way, and they want to make sure they get on somebody's spaceship before that happens. And there's only so many spaces. I don't know, maybe they do have engineers figuring it out. Oh, I forgot to tell you. The billionaire always wants to kick off the engineer who figured out how many people you can get on the spaceship, because there's always got to be a space or 10 for the billionaire and his friends. Okay. I don't know why we're here. I mean, did everybody forget Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, any number? I mean, even Star Trek. Jeez. Did you know that before Star Trek, they were afraid the American public would be too, not able to follow the storyline of Star Trek. So they gave us Lost in Space, which everybody loved. But I guess it's true. It did prime a certain amount of people to be able to watch Star Trek. We could have had Star Trek instead of Lost in Space. Boy. All right. So we got a guy who's got government contracts, who's an avowed racist, bigot, misogynist. Government contracts to blanket the sky with his Terminator Skynet satellites. And he's got a whole industry revolved around a one-way ticket to Mars. He wants to take people on a one-way ticket to Mars. A planet that has no magnetosphere, and from all evidence, looks like whatever life was there said, we got to get out. We don't have a magnetosphere anymore, and I don't know. They chipped themselves into rock and made it here and populated this planet, and that's what we are. Jesus. Hasn't anybody seen Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, or even Bradbury? God. Yes. We're not only stardust, we're from Mars. Could be. Could be. All right. Actually, I think that we're certainly capable of creating life from the muck and slime that already exists in this planet that has a magnetosphere. All right. Okay, well, enough of this Wednesday chatter about sci-fi. And, we got enough room to talk about some more bigots. Yes, we do. What do we have in store for you on this fabulous Smothered Benedict Wednesdays? Yes, the Trump immunity appeal was shattered by a judge Trump doesn't believe should be a citizen of the United States. Yes, she has poison blood. What? And these people purport, we're not racist, you're the racist. Yeah, right. On the rest of the menu, California lawmakers will consider a ban on tackle football for kids under 12. Yeah, the opponents to this say, well, we need to have them have like some good physical activity. Well, let them play flag football and stop jostling their brains in their skull before, they're getting paid to do it, or at least close to it. Jeez. The Virginia General Assembly is set to open the 2024 session with Democrats in full control of the Capitol. What are they going to do? Yeah, you know what they're going to do. They're going to legislate and fix things. We always do. And the Los Angeles Times executive editor is stepping down after a fraught 2.5-year tenure. After the break, we move to the chef's table where two convicted right-wing politicians who took refuge for hours at Poland's presidential palace are finally arrested. Yeah, the president there in Poland is a right-winger himself and is in quite a tete-a-tete with the new government, who seems to be a little bit more EU-centric, reasonable. And a prominent Cambodian critic of the government is charged with defamation over comments made on Facebook. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page, is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. Across the page to the left from that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. If you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help us put a big dent in the bills that come due, especially this time of year, the higher dollar bills, the ones that incorporate the yearly what are they, subscriptions? I don't know. But, paying for the server and, the people that we do our podcasts through and the live feed and all of that. Those aren't monthly. Those are yearly. And we try to save up. And we do. And we have you to thank for helping us do so, especially in these times of woe. I don't know. Are they so woeful? Anyway, if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso type coffee drink, that really does help us pay those bills and fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance that has been resisting for over a dozen years. We got a birthday coming up. Yes, we do. All right. Thank you. Certainly, we do send great, gracious thanks for all of your generosity over these many years. Okay. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Facebook, you can do so mostly by just going to @Netroots Radio or Netroots Radio. Sometimes you can throw off that little and part. Anyway, Tom takes care of most of those, except we all take care of Facebook, just so you know. You can also follow me, and I suggest you do, at Justice Putnam, most everywhere on social media. I post the show notes and links diaries on Daily Kos 10 minutes before showtime, and that's where the links to the articles and clips can be found for each of these shows. And you can read the full articles or listen to the full clips. You can even watch them because they're mostly YouTube, so there. But if you follow me, you'll be able to get easy access to those show notes and links. Alrighty. You can also follow the show, such as it is, on Twitter at Cookbook West. And please, most importantly, I mentioned podcasts. Please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, really wherever podcasts can be found. And it's a new year, and I'm not over Stitcher not being able to do podcasts. Serious work there. Yeah, I'm going to stop. Someday I will. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Associated Press by Adam Beam. California lawmakers will debate today, Wednesday, whether to ban tackle football for children under 12, a move pushed by advocates seeking to protect kids from brain damage, but opposed by coaches who warn it would cut off youths from an important source of physical activity. I've been a coach. We'll get into it here in just a moment. The bill, authored by Democratic Assembly member Kevin McCarthy, is scheduled to have its first public hearing before a legislative committee and is still a long way from passing. Today's hearing is crucial. The bill must clear the state assembly by the end of January to have a chance of becoming law this year. If passed, the bill would not take effect until 2026. Proposed amendments would gradually phase in implementation through 2029. The bill comes as flag football has been gaining popularity nationwide, especially for girls. Now, research has shown tackle football causes brain damage, and the risk increases the longer people play football, said Chris Nowinski, CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, and a former Harvard football player and WWE professional wrestler. It can cause chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which causes the death of nerve cells in the brain. Now, no state has banned tackle football for kids, but there have been attempts to do so. Similar bills that were introduced previously in California, New York, and Illinois failed to pass. California law already bans full contact practices for high school and youth football teams during the off-season and limits them to 2 practices per week during the preseason and regular season. A law that took effect in 2021 also requires youth football officials complete concussion and head injury education in addition to other safeguards. Now, I just want to make a few points here since, I don't know, most of us all played football and some of us tried to play on the collegiate level like I did. But the concussions or risks of concussions or the cumulative effect of concussions are not limited to game time. They happen during practice. All the small, tiny little jostlings of your brain bouncing inside your skull during practice adds up. So the idea of limiting the amount of bouncing your brain inside your skull, especially while it's still forming, might be a good idea. Now, I will mention that to play sports in my family, you had to go above and beyond. Because my professor father was really not into collegiate, competitive, scholastic sports. He was a professor. But regardless, we weren't allowed to play Pop Warner growing up. We played flag football until I got to high school. It's not like we didn't play some tackle football, up in the schoolyard with no pads, sort of like a rugby game in a way. But let's just say that when we were playing those pickup games, we weren't really jostling our brains around, really. And we weren't practicing to do it either. So I don't think that this initiative has a possibility of passing this year. But it would be nice, especially since flag football is coming up. But expect all the usual actors to start complaining, well, we want our kids to have brain damage. And anyway, who wants to play with girls? Sarah Rankin of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. A remade Virginia General Assembly will convene its 2024 session today, Wednesday, with a Democratic majority newly in charge of both chambers after a consequential election cycle that followed 2 years of divided control of the legislature. Guns, gambling, abortion, public safety, and other issues will be on the agenda as Democrats seek to hold their razor-thin majorities together over the course of the 60-day session. They will need to win Youngkin support for most of their priorities, though in a few areas they will be able to move without them. I think there are some things we're going to be able to agree on, incoming Democratic House Speaker Don Scott said of the governor, ticking off spots of typical bipartisan cooperation like education, mental health, and workforce development. Other legislative items like gun control and Youngkin's push for a new sports stadium. It remains to be seen where and whether compromise can be found, Scott said in the interview. Scott, a trial lawyer, will make history as the first black person to serve as Speaker, and he will take a seat in an increasingly diverse Capitol. Last year's election cycle, when every legislative seat was on the ballot, was the first held under new maps drawn in the last redistricting process. The new maps, coupled with the requirement that legislators live in their district, contributed to a wave of retirements that included some of the Assembly's most senior members. Others were ousted in an especially competitive primary season. Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The executive editor of the Los Angeles Times announced yesterday, Tuesday, that he is stepping down after a 2.5-year tenure at the newspaper that spanned the coronavirus pandemic and 3 Pulitzer Prizes, as well as a period of layoffs and contentious contract negotiations with the newsroom's union. Kevin Merida's last day will be Friday of this week. He and Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, the paper's owner, mutually agreed on the departure, according to statements released yesterday, Tuesday. The Times won 3 Pulitzer Prizes under Merida's leadership. The journalism veteran joined the storied newspaper in June of 2021 after leading an ESPN unit focused on race, culture, and sports. The LA Times Guild, the paper's union, released a statement wishing Merida well, calling him a smart and thoughtful leader under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. The union's leadership group, the Unit Council, informed members it would work with Soon Xiong to find a successor who can bring vision and clarity to the Times in the months and years ahead. Now, Soon Xiong and his family acquired the Times nearly 6 years ago from the Tribune Company, restoring the 142-year-old institution to local ownership after more than a decade of cost-cutting and staff exodus. Let's see if they can bring it to the storied heights of the Chandlers. We'll see. All right, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, family ties that bind and destroy. There's plenty of antics and drama on display in the Iron Claw, with most of it taking place outside of the wrestling ring. Based on a true story, the film tells the tale of the Von Erichs, the Texas-based wrestling family who ruled professional wrestling from the 1960s to the 90s. We see some newsreel-type flashbacks of Patriarch Fritz's glory days, but most of the story centers on his four sons and Fritz's attempts to groom them into stars. While Fritz succeeds, it comes at a grave cost. Early on, son Kevin, played by Zac Efron in a career-making performance, talks about a family curse. However, as things progress, it becomes apparent that the real curse is Fritz himself and his take-no-prisoners approach to training his sons without regard to their physical or mental health. Along with Efron, the cast of brothers also includes Jeremy Allen White, Harris Dickinson, and Hope McCallany, all of whom give amazing performances and display remarkable chemistry. While a bit more effort could have gone into the development of the last two actors' respective characters, their performances more than make up for that flaw. There are occasional comic elements to the film, including an appearance by big-haired 80s wrestling icon Ric Flair, seen in archived video, and played live action with over-the-top relish by Aaron Dean Eisenberg. This one turns out to be mostly a tragedy, though, about a family that dwindles one by one thanks to a father obsessed with molding his sons in his image. Named for the family's signature in-ring supposed death grip, The Iron Claw is a thoughtful film that meditates on the effects of family dynamics and will have you in its grip long after the credits roll. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is OPB. I'm Crystal Ligori. The Pacific Northwest has been a hub for coffee culture for nearly a century. But even still, it may surprise you to know that we've got scientists here whose entire field of study is the chemistry of coffee. Christopher Hendon is an associate professor at the University of Oregon who has the appropriate nickname of Dr. Coffee. And now he and a team of volcanologists have found a way to up your coffee game by adding just a little spray of water before you grind your beans. He joins me now to explain. Christopher, hello.
Hi, Crystal. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So I know the research your team has done centered around this idea of adding just a little bit of water to the coffee beans before they're ground. I understand some coffee pros are already doing that, but no one actually studied the why behind it until now.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, this is a really nice example of academic research being inspired by some industrial know-how. So when you grind coffee, the process creates a tremendous amount of static electricity. And this has been a known problem in the coffee industry and other industries for that matter for a very long time. The practitioners that basically baristas, if you like, have been trying to mitigate this charging. And about maybe 10 years ago, the idea was originally posited that maybe 1 or 2 drops of water on the whole beans would seemingly reduce the charge. Perhaps it was never charging in the first place in the grinder, or perhaps the water was just creating a surface layer on the coffee grounds themselves. They didn't really know, but the observation generally was that you were seeing fewer charged particles, so there was less mess. So we were inspired by this because that is obviously a nice scientific example of a macroscopic observable, like less mess on my counter.
Right.
Yeah, right. But then something happening on the microscopic level, like, for example, maybe no charges were ever formed. And we wonder why that is. What could possibly be giving rise to that?
What does your research mean for coffee drinkers when we're figuring out what kind of beans to buy? Because I know that different roasts have a different amount of moisture in them already.
Generally, coffee starts out somewhere around 10% internal moisture. And then you roast the coffee, turning it brown and eventually maybe even black. And as you roast it darker and darker, you're driving out more and more water. And so generally we find that for dark roast coffees, they're going to charge a lot more and a lot more negative. Whereas light roast coffees actually do charge as well, but sometimes they even charge positively. And so this is a pretty interesting phenomenon because it's very rare to find a material that can not only charge a lot, but also change its polarity from positive to negative depending on its chemical composition. And so generally the idea here is that if you're going to add a little bit of water, you're going to see the greatest impact in charge reduction for darker roast coffees because those are the ones that have the most charge. But you'll also still see the impact for light roast coffees as well, of course, because we've all experienced that where the light roast, you grind them and they go everywhere too.
Yes, I definitely have coffee chaff like all over my countertop after I grind. I do have a little bit of a background in coffee myself, but it has been a minute since I was pulling shots at a cafe. So what are the real world applications of the study, both for a home setting, but also in a cafe?
So I'll start with the home setting. I mean, fundamentally, the biggest advance here for the average user is going to be that the addition of a single drop of water, or as little as a single drop of water, is going to make a marked difference in the amount of static dust that's generated while grinding. And so this means that when you grind your beans, you're not going to see that stuff stick to the surface of the grinder and cover your counter and so forth. So fundamentally, it's just cleaner. In the industrial setting, it's a little more complicated because if you're thinking about the brew situation that would give rise to the biggest difference in having the particles be freely flowing from one another versus being clumped, that's in espresso. But in an espresso format in a cafe, they're using grinders that have to go through a tremendous amount of coffee during a busy period in the morning, for example. Mm-hmm. So right now, there's actually not a technology on the market that is going to introduce water to those beans as you're grinding in a busy cafe. It's not something that you're going to see in most cafes, in most environments for quite some time. But the cafes themselves are the place that stand to benefit the most because if you can extract more from your coffee, that leads to a direct monetary savings for the industry.
You're a chemist and Dr. Coffee by profession, but for this study, you also teamed up with volcanologists on the UO campus. Volcanoes aren't exactly what I immediately think of when I think of coffee, so can you tell me more about how that science overlaps?
This is a great example of a fruitful collaboration. I built the coffee lab in the public space on campus, and I encourage the listeners, by the way, to come and visit us because that's part of our science outreach program. And in one of our outreach activities, the volcanologists were there and were observing this static charge being generated during grinding and considered this in the context of their work. Now, basically, when a volcano erupts, it creates a plume of ash that gets ejected into the atmosphere. And sometimes the ash is so charged and staticky that you see lightning discharges above volcanoes. And actually, the amount of charge and these discharge events are very useful for studying the inside of the volcanic plume, where, of course, you can't fly a helicopter or send a drone because you're, in the middle of a volcano. So instead, you can use the charge to learn something about the topology of the volcano. And they basically simulate eruptions in the laboratory with a small plume of dust that gets ejected into a box, and they study the charging. And so we had the technology on campus already, and certainly weren't the ones to invent it. And instead, we just repackaged it and basically placed that technology underneath the grinder. We're really just using expertise from the volcanologists that I had no idea was even something that people studied. But at the same time, they also had no idea that charging in coffee was something that mattered on the industrial scale to the coffee industry. So really, this was a really nice example of, having this open platform for us to meet each other, talk about pertinent problems, and, hopefully do some really excellent science.
I know that you've shaped your career around coffee, so I am curious, what is your favorite way to drink coffee?
Well, in the morning when I get up, I prepare 1 cup for myself and 1 for my wife. And I really enjoy that period of time because then I go off to work and I don't see her for the whole day. So that's certainly my favorite way to do it. It's just to pour over coffee in the morning. But you have to remember, I work in a coffee laboratory as well. And so every day I'm surrounded by students, excellent undergraduates and graduate students that are working with coffee, and they're always producing extracts that are worthy of tasting. And so my favorite one is the one that makes the students really excited. They have that aha moment and they realize this is why they're interested in this topic, because there's flavors and sort of novel science that they're unpacking, but they're able to taste the difference in their science. And that's a really unusual but fun opportunity that sets coffee science apart from typical chemistry.
Christopher, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Christopher Hendon is an associate professor at the University of Oregon. His team's study on reducing static charge in coffee is featured in the science journal Matter. This is OPB.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. In January 2023, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine signed HB 458, one of the most restrictive voter ID laws in the country. It also tightened several absentee voting rules. On January 8, 2024, a federal court upheld HB 458, affecting thousands of unhoused, elderly, student, and disabled voters. Using a pretext of election integrity, the Ohio legislature eliminated non-ID documentation like utility bills and mandated a state-issued ID, military ID, or a passport. It eliminated student IDs, a tactic used by red states to suppress younger voters. And it forced those without ID, including the elderly and disabled, to apply in person and with all the necessary documents for a state-issued ID. Theoretically, voters without ID can vote, but only by provisional ballot, which counts only if the voter returns with the proper ID. HB 458 restricted that too, shortening the time to return from 10 days to 4. Nevertheless, the U.S. District Court judge ruled that voting in Ohio remained very easy and that the plaintiffs failed to show a burden on voters in the state's 2023 elections. A new challenge filed January 5th by a physically disabled voter challenges HB 458's restriction of absentee ballot delivery by only immediate family members. We have more at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1860. That was a day of tragedy as the Pemberton Mill collapsed in Lawrence, Massachusetts. The collapse of the 5-story textile mill was one of the worst workplace disasters in U.S. history. Most of the 800 workers in the mill were women and Irish immigrants. Some were teenagers. During that fateful afternoon, as they were working, they heard a strange rattling noise. Then, within seconds, the mill collapsed. Tons of machinery crashed through the collapsing floors, crushing workers. Many more were trapped. Rescuers attempted to free the trapped workers. But that night, as the rescue efforts continued, a fire broke out in the ruined plant. Many trapped workers were burned alive. Helplessly, the rescuers could only look on with horror. The exact number of dead is unknown, but estimates range between 88 and 145 workers killed that day, with another 150 suffering serious injuries. The large building was only 7 years old when it collapsed. Poor construction was determined to be the cause of the disaster. In an effort to maximize profits, the mill had more heavy equipment inside than the building could support. The New York Times reported the building was never considered to be as staunch as it ought to have been. It was built about 7 years since and was then thought a sham. Indeed, before the machinery was put in, the walls spread to such a degree that some 22 tons of iron plates were put in to save it from falling by its own weight. After the disaster, the mill was rebuilt. Workers at the new mill claimed to see the ghosts of those who had died in the tragedy. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 36 degrees Fahrenheit, a bit cooler than yesterday. We are currently under a winter storm warning with blizzards, yes, blizzards, occurring as we speak about 1,000 feet above us. So we'll see how that imparts its snow upon our region. Expecting highs of only about 34 degrees Fahrenheit. We have snow this morning, which will be giving way to a mixture of rain and snow this afternoon. Temps should be nearly steady in the low to mid-30s, winds light and variable. And then mostly cloudy tonight with lows in the upper 20s, low 30s, winds light and variable. Mostly cloudy skies tomorrow with highs in the upper 30s, low 40s, winds light and variable, and then looks like we're expecting at least an inch of rain coming on Friday early. So we'll keep track of that. The pollen rating is at none currently. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 30 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.91 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles, and relative humidity is at 95%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 40 degrees and fair. Paris is 32 degrees and partly cloudy with a weather advisory for ice and snow. Rome is 50 degrees and partly cloudy. Bagram is 35 and clear. Kiev is 26 and cloudy. Hong Kong is 66 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 42 and mostly cloudy. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 65 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 51 and cloudy with a small craft advisory. Chicago, Illinois is 35 degrees, cloudy with its own small craft advisory. And New York, New York is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy with a gale warning. and that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Guerra of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Polish police yesterday, Tuesday, arrested 2 politicians convicted of abuse of power who had taken refuge for hours in the palace of President Andrzej Duda in a dramatic escalation of a standoff between the new and previous governments. Duda welcomed the members of the former ruling party into the presidential palace as police went to their homes to arrest them. Polish media reported the men were arrested inside the palace. Warsaw police gave no details, saying only that the arrest was in accordance with a court order. The events escalated a dispute between the new government led by Prime Minister Donald Tusk and the ultra-conservative Law and Justice Party that governed Poland for 8 years until last month following its defeat in a general election in October. Duda is closely aligned with Law and Justice and is making it clear that he will oppose Tusk's agenda. Duda's second and final term runs until mid-2025. Tusk, who has promised to restore democratic norms in Poland, accused the president of going along with actions by Law and Justice to create chaos and instability after its electoral defeat, saying that Duda, quote, must stop this spectacle, which is leading to a very dangerous situation, end quote. The prime minister claimed that the president was obstructing justice by giving the wanted men refuge. At a news conference, he read out a section of the penal code that he alleged Duda had violated, which carries a prison term from 3 months to 5 years.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Feng Cheng of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. An outspoken critic of Cambodia's government who was badly hurt by assailants 4 months ago has been arrested on a defamation complaint brought by a cabinet member for comments he posted on Facebook. The complaint filed by the Minister of Labor and Vocational Training, Heng Suer, against Ni Nak drew sharp criticism from Human Rights Watch, which said it showed that the government of Prime Minister Hun Manet is as repressive as the one that preceded it. Hun Manet, in August, succeeded his father, Hun Sen, who tolerated little opposition when he was in power for 38 years. Phil Robertson, Human Rights Watch's Deputy Asia Director, said that Hun Manet is following closely in the footsteps of his father and restricting the rights to express opinions, join independent organizations, and hold peaceful public protests. And he is suppressing news of these actions by attacking the few remaining independent media outlets operating in the country. He said that Niequist had done nothing that he should be arrested for and called for his release. The Phnom Penh Municipal Court ordered Niequist held on charges of incitement and defamation after the labor minister filed a criminal complaint against him for comments he posted on Facebook in December of last year. His post questioned the government's decision to hand over some 225 acres of land in the southern province of Kamput Province to an individual he named only as Heng Sauer, who a local newspaper later said was the minister. If convicted on both charges, Niequist could face up to 5 years in prison. And that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Terrytown Chowder 2. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.